In this episode, we take a deep dive into the New South Wales South Coast with local property expert Matt Knight. Once the destination of choice for sea changes and tree changes escaping the city, the South Coast is now facing a shift in sentiment. So what's really happening on the ground? We unpack whether the regional boom is losing steam, how population trends are reshaping demand, and what that means for property prices, affordability, and future growth. From new infrastructure projects to rezoning initiatives that could change the face of once sleepy towns, Matt is going to give us an unfiltered view of the opportunities and the challenges facing buyers and investors today. Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
Hi, I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, currently ranked number 3 in the MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, everything we talk about today is not personal advice, and we recommend you engage the services of a licensed and experienced professional.
Our guest today is Matt Knight, founder of Precium Buyers Agents. Matt has spent decades studying and investing in the New South Wales South Coast, and today we're looking forward to his on-the-ground insights into this ever-evolving region. It is really good to see you again, Matt. It's been a while. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Veronica. Hey, Chris. How you going?
Doing well, Matt. Thanks for coming on. I mean, obviously COVID's 5 years now, which is crazy. And, we had a big sea change shift. I mean, there was probably even a bit of a shift out of Sydney prior to COVID, to be honest. There was a little bit of a run in prices in 2019. And, but I mean, what's happened over the last couple of years? And we've personally seen a bit of a retreat back to the cities and people are a bit more concerned about, running away from the city around their jobs, etc. I mean, how's the market changing down there?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. And I particularly liked how you said decades. Veronica, you made me feel really old. And I'm looking at this, the extra pepper on the chin that probably wasn't there last time we spoke. But you're absolutely right. It's hard to believe it's been, 5 years since kind of the start of COVID. I guess my take on it is that we already had a well-established, slow but sure trickle of people moving to the coast. And I don't think that was brand new. I think that was, happening for probably the best part of a decade or more before COVID. Mm-hmm. And it's always made up a percentage of our client base. And I'm one of them. I mean, I grew up in Sydney, left Sydney about 17, 18 years ago and decided to see change with young children instead of waiting until I was older. And, we've never had any regrets about doing that. I think COVID supercharged that trend for a short time. Everyone said, carpe diem, seize the day, let's get out of here, get away from the germs and go and be happy somewhere. And everybody within QE of one of the capital cities in Australia disappeared, a few hours out and found their little version of paradise. And certainly the South Coast was one of those. And we benefited a double-edged sword, we got a lot. Population growth, a lot of price growth, but it really hurt some people. Locals couldn't buy, locals couldn't rent. I've got personal friends who were dual income employed, perfect tenants, unable to rent a house. Completely functional homelessness, and they actually moved interstate because they were just so
desperate.
Frustrated.
Yeah.
So it was a really tricky time, COVID. And when it finished and that trend ended, I feel like we saw about 18 months to 2 years of flat out exhaustion. People stopped moving out of the city and many went back. Not everyone, but some went back. I feel like everyone who had put their Europe budget on hold for a couple of years all of a sudden desperately wanted to travel. So the idea of buying a beach house became very unpopular for really all of 2023 and 2024.
Okay.
And the market for beach houses 100% slowed down. Time on market blew out, stock on market blew out. It was very hard to sell. Shout out to John, friend and I finished a development, 1 into 2 subdivision in Culburra Beach. And we tried to sell, and we sold it last year. And it was really hard, trying to sell, house and land type situations on the beach, thinking there's got to be all these retirees, there's got to be all these sea changes. Where are they? Well, they went into their shell for, I reckon, 2 years.
Mm.
The data we track is really a mixture of things, but stock on market and days on market are one of those sort of metrics that kind of canary in the coal mine for these trends. And we saw stock on market in most of the suburbs where we're buying on the South Coast peak in Christmas. So it's been falling since then. The trend, the 2-year post-COVID trend of a softening market really ended at Christmas. Christmas was kind of the worst of it.
Okay.
And we've seen stock levels falling, sales speeds are picking up. I've just signed, I think, 3 investor clients, 2 of whom want to Airbnb that house. And so we're seeing that trend change again, where it's like, oh, holiday homes are a thing again, or moving out of the city. If they didn't do it in COVID, if they can do it because of work, or they're in semi-retirement, they're thinking about it again.
There's a lot there to talk about here, Matt. I mean, I don't know where to go, to be honest, because firstly, I mean, you've highlighted some really the double-edged sword. So I think we should have a chat about that. I mean, what really interests me is that 2-year period you spoke about then. I mean, that wasn't just South Coast. Sydney have gone through a tough couple of years. Maybe not so much Perth or Adelaide or other parts around the country, but because in those boom FOMO markets, some markets just run too far, right? They become way too frothy, and they get hit harder when the Sydney rose-coloured glasses come off. They're like, where got hit the hardest on the South Coast? And I mean, for our listeners as well, kind of maybe describe the area that you're sort of speaking about as well, because some people might not be as familiar.
Sure. So really what we're talking about is a piece of land that Sydney is kind of bordered on the south by the Royal National Park. So the Shire, which is where I'm from, which cops plenty of flack, and for good reason, the insular Shire is the hard kind of southern edge of Sydney because of the Royal National Park being this huge barrier. Everything south of that Royal National Park, the northern suburbs of Wollongong, kind of Thirroul, Austinmere, Bulli, down to the Wollongong CBD, and then Shell Harbour and Shell Cove, which we'll probably talk about later in this episode, because I think there's some really interesting, you said infrastructure. I think there's some interesting things to talk about there in Shell Cove, the southern edge of Wollongong. Then we're talking about Kiama, the Shoalhaven, which would be Nowra, Culburra Beach, Ulladulla, Mollymook. And then the far south coast is kind of Bateman's Bay, Moruya, Narooma, and down towards the border, Marinnville and Eden. So what we have is a population that is very coastal centric. We've got a lot of national parks and steep country west of the coast, and we've got escarpments and cliffs and water catchment areas that mean you just don't have a lot of population apart from along the coastal strip. And we've got steep and windy roads to get to Canberra from here. We've got, very, very few and far between people occupying, apart from the Southern Highlands, which is a bit of an exception to that rule. We've really got a coastal centric population down here. And so, yeah, that's the geography that we're talking about, is this thin strip down the coast within about a 3 to 4 hour drive from the southern edge of Sydney.
Okay, so that's so in that area, where in COVID, did it just really charge on way too far? I mean, I remember there's some crazy buying that was happening, and I mean, you cannot knock the lifestyle down there. I mean, I would happily live in Kiama, Gerringong, Culburra Beach, any of these places. Like, it's some pretty stunning locations. But where did city people just go way too hard and just way past what locals ever see as value?
Yeah, so the entire coast got hit and went too hard for too long, and so it did overshoot, I guess, a natural demand. And I feel like the average postcode, including your Thirroul and Austinmere, which is commute distance to Sydney, right? So that's your high quality beach, but you could just about get to the city every day if you needed to, all the way down to those pockets like Gerringong, Gerroa, which are very classic coastal surfy town, and then some of the little beach hamlets further south. The market overshot, and within a 2 to 3 year COVID period, we saw something like 70 to 90% capital growth. So across 2 to 3 years. So we had Austinmere, I know during COVID, did probably a national record of about 40% capital growth in one 12-month period, which was just bananas. And I can tell you, buying in that was awful. It was so hard. But what we've seen is that the markets that pulled back, obviously everything that grew by 80 to 90%, I think fell by something like 20% after COVID.
Okay.
20 to 25% pullback was pretty normal down here. And so that certainly was noticeable and palpable. I would say the markets that are recovering slower are the ones that are really more isolated beach hamlets, and they're less suitable for people who have average jobs. So the real like little beach hamlets like your Culburra Beach or your Manyana, Bendalong, there's very few shops there, or there's some shops. There's not a lot of work there. And so people have to then commute 40 to 50 minutes to a town to have a job if they're going to work locally. So you do see that some of those hamlets that were more isolated were the ones that pulled back maybe more like 25 or 30%. And they took the extra 6 months to start recovering.
And you're finding that a lot of people are it's kind of like holiday house, second home, or retirees, and the family market aren't moving there, maybe because it's a little bit too isolated. They want a little bit more action. I mean, Ostomy is kind of like the best of all worlds, right? You've got the cafes, you've got the beach, you've got the train, you've got everything you possibly would want from a suburb, school. But, so that should recover more because it's got the Sydney family market still supporting it. But you're finding these little beach coves just haven't got that buyer. And so, is that the real reason, or what do you think?
I think you're right. I think that the markets with critical mass, with schools, with shopping centres, with commute access to the larger satellite cities have recovered and are recovering and have already set, like, so Bulli and Thirroul, there's been beachfront records that are eclipsing COVID sales. So we're now we've seen this peak, we've seen this fall, and 24 was really a flat year when interest rates were high and everyone was depressed, right? But now we're seeing new highs in those markets like the northern suburbs of Wollongong. And we've seen that filter down. We've seen some records being set in Coma Downs and Minamurra, for example. So the beach house market has now well and truly recovered. The bottom end of the market has recovered with that first home buyer who saw an opportunity in 2024. They were like the only people buying in 24, and it was a really good idea for first home buyers to jump into the market because it was really soft. I would say the middle of the market, that $1.5 to $2.5 million price tag, not top premium real estate, but good quality houses, they're the ones that have been lagging and recovering slower, and they might be 3 to 6 months behind in their recovery. And further down the coast, we're further back in that recovery too.
Well, that's an important thing though, isn't it? That distance from either Sydney or Wollongong, or even train
and Canberra
access,
too.
And Canberra, train access to anywhere. I would imagine the further south you go, that the reason for going down there is less, and therefore your buyer pool, or the types of buyers that would go down there, is sort of more of a narrower type of buyer, or a demographic that would buy there. I'm interested too. I mean, you mentioned about the investors that you just signed up. For example, 2 out of 3 of them are specifically looking at Airbnb. And it's something actually that Michelle Adair mentioned when we interviewed her a few weeks back. And she's, we were talking about the number of investment properties that are held by people, or 72% own one investment property. And she was saying that, that we don't know how many of those actually holiday homes that are on the short-term rental market as opposed to in long-term rental market. What is your feel down there? Is that typically the type of investor that wants to buy down there now? Is it something that a lot of previous investors are converting to that? Is there what's the balance there?
That's a good question. And I actually agree with you. I don't think we have great data. And we've tried for years to ascertain how many of the holiday homes, or how many of the rental stock is holiday versus long-term. And I don't even think REA Group or Domain have done us great favors with how their metrics are tracked, because it's never been very easy to have clear numbers on that breakdown. I would say the further south you go, the higher the percentage of the rental stock is holiday home use, as a general rule. I would think in Wollongong, it's far and away dominated by long-term rentals. The same thing in the more serious towns where there is critical mass, your Kiama, your Nowra, even far on the far south coast, off the coast, Bega, we're seeing long-term rentals, tight rental markets, strong rental markets. Even though the yields aren't super like high, the rental market is stable. On the beach, people are chasing that Airbnb type extra bit of return. And so the percentage of short-term holiday let properties goes way up, because if everything in a beach hamlet is 2 mil and above, it's very hard to justify buying an investment property there unless you can generate, that 5% yield, which you just can't do in long-term rentals in a beach hamlet.
Well, I guess also that they're really looking, rather than actually looking to invest, they're looking at a way to fund a lifestyle property. So even technically, it's not even, the purpose is not investment. It's just that there happens to be a bit of icing on the cake.
Well, for a lot of them, the purpose is I'm going to retire into it in 5 or 10 years. So it's a future retirement home that they want to go to. They just can't quite ditch the job yet.
And so, Matt, what are you seeing? You mentioned earlier where some people have gone back to the cities. Is it just purely because their work prospects have been limited and they didn't think the whole work from home or remote work forever just hasn't worked, and they've been sort of caught out and they have to sort of buy and then sell and go back to the city? What have you seen around people returning?
Yeah, my data points are really small, so it's all anecdotal. I don't have a perfect catchment of thousands, but of the few dozen people that I have worked with and talked to around this particular issue, the majority is still here and they're loving it and they don't want to go back.
Yeah.
The significant minority who have gone back or who are in the process of going back, some of them were called back by a large employer or a government department, and they weren't happy about it. But, you work for the government. If you want the long service leave and the sick leave and they tell you got to do 50% from the city, then you got to do 50% from the city. It's been tricky for those people because some of them did make a move with young families fully intending to stay permanently. I think the young families who moved permanently and are the most happy with it, often one of the parents is a tech worker and can be completely mobile. We saw Atlassian and some of those other companies saying we're going full mobile during COVID. So that, I think that culture has stuck. Even though there's the backlash that is in the media, it's not undone everything of the work from home movement. I think it's undone a third of it.
Right. Moving to moving away from a big city it actually isn't for everyone. Not everyone thrives in that environment. Many do, as obviously you have, and you're talking about the ones that do. What are some of the things, I guess, the hurdles that people might encounter that they wouldn't have thought about before they make such a move that might end up in a U-turn, distinct from work?
Sure. I think that people who thrive on the energy of the city, I was up there last weekend at a jazz concert and Vivid was on and my son had never seen that many people before. And he's like, how do you handle crowds like this, Dad? And I'm like, well, I was used to it, but you're not. So we had a really great conversation around that. I think if you love kind of the energy, the nightlife, the kind of the music or art scene of a capital city, moving to a small town can be for some people quite isolating or quite drab, because those things are not happening as often, right? And we're in small towns down here. And we get excited about a little country music festival or a little, arts week. And it's great. And there's some really high quality, produce. We're doing pretty well as foodies on the South Coast. We eat really well. We've got some great art. We've got some great music. But it's on a small scale. So if you expect to have all of the things at your fingertips like you would in a capital city, you'll be disappointed. I think it suits people who are much more outdoorsy. So they're going to go and find their own entertainment in the national parks or in the ocean or on a push bike or on a surfboard. It really suits that group. I think it really suits homebodies and people who are into making their own entertainment, either themselves or with their family.
Yep.
So it sounds a bit like me, to be honest.
It's what about schooling? How do people, because one thing anecdotally I've heard of a number of people have moved out of cities into regional areas that they where the kids are at primary school, that's fine. But when it gets to high school, they're suddenly faced with this challenge. If they're happy with the local high school, that's fine. But if they're not, often then they've got to start looking at boarding school, which is it's just something they never would have considered if they were sitting if they were
in a city.
still in the city.
I think we're lucky on the coast. We've got enough private schools that people don't have to go to boarding schools. So the distances are not as extreme as far western New South Wales. We do have private schools every hour or so. So if you're willing to cop a big bus trip, you can commute to a private school that's really quite high quality, even if you're personally not happy with the local public system.
Yeah.
Many people are okay to accept that kind of the public system with its faults and foibles. When the local Anglican school shut about sort of 8 years ago in our area, we were looking at that very challenge of, do we bus our kids up the road an hour each way to the private school, or do we embrace the local public system? And we did. And I ended up showing up to my first P&C meeting, and they went, "Tag, you're it." And I was the president for 6 years. So you just get in and you do what you can and you make a go of that community. If it doesn't work for you, you're right. Small towns can be hard yakka and quite difficult. I think you can avoid boarding school if you want to, but the compromise might be a really big commute. I think people are getting much more savvy at picking the stretch of coast that they're happy with based on the schools as well, if they're coming with kids. The real challenge that I'm personally facing right now that you can't undo is uni.
Right,
yeah.
I've got two kids my two daughters are now back in Sydney at university. And so we have a great Zoom relationship now, but I don't see them anywhere near as often as I would like. And, we've just planned a holiday to get the clan back together again. But it's challenging, right? And the flip side for me is it's like, okay, well, if I had stayed in Sydney, my mortgage might be a little bigger, but I'd be having my kids at home during uni. I haven't, so now I'm funding them to live, away from home.
It's funny though,
there's a trend. My daughter is in a gap year, our first year out of school, and there's so many kids that I talk to, their parents anyway, I don't talk to their kids. They've gone to ANU. So we're living in Sydney and they're actually boarding anyway. They've actually gone elsewhere to go to uni. Or
that
Melbourne,
makes me feel
another
better.
one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Veronica.
So I wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was actually going to say the same thing actually, because, I was trying to call up a client, this week, CFO, got, kids just finishing school. And he was just explaining that, he wants them to get out at 18. He wants them to go Newcastle or Canberra or Orange or, to give them that life experience and get them on their own 2 feet. So, you know what I mean? I think that's, I guess you might think they might want to stay near you, but often they don't, I guess, even though you get to 18. What are some of the other big challenges you find?
My message to my daughters was, if you want to stay here, you can, but really you're going to be better off going and having an adventure. So go to Canberra, go to Sydney, go somewhere with a really interesting and diverse set of experiences and live the next stage of your life. And they were a little nervous about that, obviously leaving home at 18, but they're thriving now. And they're just so happy doing what they're doing. So there's just, for me, there's no comparison, even though we actually have some great new facilities in the Shoalhaven now with kind of country university centres and a lot of people doing study. It's really more those locals who have jobs and connections here and don't want to leave. They can now make study happen locally. That's great through universities. But for me, I wanted my kids to go and have a really rich experience.
So we talked earlier about first home buyers, jumping into the last couple of years, seeing the opportunities. So has there been an increased opportunity for first home buyers to get a foothold in the market? Is that something that I guess as something that bucked the trend of what you'll read about in the papers? The idea is that, the first home buyers can't get in, but we know it's not actually true. It's difficult, but it's not true. So has there been a marked shift in what they're buying or whether they're taking advantage of government incentives, for example? What are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I absolutely think there has been a good number of first home buyers who took the opportunity to jump into the market last year, and we helped a number of them on our books. Obviously, not every first home buyer would would mentally have the budget for a buyer's agent as well. So we spent a lot of time on the phone giving free advice, because not all of them were in a position to sign up, and that's okay. Like I get it. I probably would have struggled to find a buyer's agent fee when I was in my 20s. But there were a lot of people who did buy, and there were homes that were genuinely good value if you compared it back to the COVID peak. I mean, in my area, there was really nothing under 1112 during COVID, and we've been seeing that kind of more, I would call it B or C grade stock, but you're talking about basic houses, no water views, well back from the beach. So, but they're fun, right? Like they're great. They're great homes. They're great family settings. And we saw a lot of first home buyers buy there. I don't think it got any coverage at all in the media. I don't think it suits the media because there's no hype in it, right? It's not like, it doesn't suit that, either the anger piece or the victim piece or anything that's inflammatory that sells newspapers or gets clicks. But I think a lot of people did jump into that market, and kudos to them.
I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. Most people don't realise that they can cost themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars over the medium to long term when they make property decisions without all of the information that they need. And what I do is help people with tricky real estate problems, which often masquerade as simple questions like, should I sell my investment property because the interest repayments are hurting? Or should I buy before I sell? Or the other way around. You can connect with me and access all of the tools that I've created to help you make better property decisions at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you will find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program. You can connect with my Sydney-based property management and buyer's agency teams, Australia-wide vendor advocacy, or ask me for introduction to the small group of buyer's agents that I would personally recommend across the country. That's veronicamorgan.com.au.
If you're looking to buy your first home, thinking of upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and, importantly, get the finance right. Reach out via my website, alcove.com.au.
One thing that's been happening across a number of regional areas, and I have not heard this happening down the South Coast, Bo, is that the data-driven buyers agents are sort of piling to certain areas. There was actually a piece in AFR, and there was the backstory of a sale only a week or two ago, and it was said about a sale in Mildura, and they were talking about all the buyers agents that are piling in sight unseen, making offers within an hour of being on social media. Price exceeded everybody's expectations. 19 offers, 17 of which were buyers agents hadn't inspected the property. So there's regional areas where first home buyers are competing with that, and which is pretty horrific. So I'm guessing from what you're saying that there's been none of that activity done. So somehow the South Coast is not turning up in the data. It's not saying. Yeah. Then the arrows are pointing your way.
It makes me both sad and angry to hear those stories, and concerned for the clients of those services, and
me too,
and for those services and their longevity as well. I think thankfully our prices have been high enough and our yields have been low enough that we haven't been hotspotted by that kind of crew. Yep. I think that crew, or whatever that group, if there's a mob of them, if they're traveling in a pack, I think they're currently chasing certain Queensland towns and certain Victorian towns.
Yeah.
Because their algorithm tells them that's what they should be doing. We could have a long conversation about that, but that's another issue. We haven't seen that kind of activity here in recent times.
Matt, where you said some good things about the infrastructure down at sort of Shoalhaven. I mean, I've gone down there not enough times recently, but I can see the freeways are getting better and better, right? And there was going to be an F6 freeway coming out of Sydney. I don't even know where that's up. Had issues with the sinkholes and all that sort of stuff. But where's some huge? Because it's a shorter drive down there now, right? And where's some of the big infrastructure changes that are making it much more enticing for families to move to?
Yeah. So the things that are really moving the needle in local pockets. We've just seen the completion of the Shell Cove Marina, which was about 8 years and $2 billion. So it was a big project. And that's now got a ton of really kind of attractive medium and higher density apartments. And kind of it's obviously denser than some people on the South Coast like, but it is a very well-regarded, well-planned, master-planned village around a beautiful new harbour. There's a ton of money with people in their boats, and there's kind of hotels and shops and other infrastructure that's gone around that. So we've seen that the Shell Cove Marina has really changed the long-term negative mindset of the southern half of Wollongong. It was always working class BHP workers' boxes and housing commission and a bit rough. It still has those streets and it still has issues, but it's getting better. And the gentrification kind of clock is ticking around for that southern half of Wollongong. The new train station, which happened in, I think it was 2018, at Shell Harbour, added to that. And what we now have, they've just started construction on a new Shell Harbour hospital. So they're increasing the medical facilities separate to Wollongong Hospital, which is still the major South Coast medical facility. But then what's happening on the coast is there's been all this extra medical funding. So Nowra's hospital has over $400 million on a redevelopment. Moruya has a brand new hospital facility being built now, and Narooma has a smaller new hospital going in. So we've now got all of these extra medical facilities coming in. And what I'm hearing is a very different tone from the older buyers.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Retirees are so much more comfortable to move to an area if they feel like there's good medical care there.
Yeah.
So, and that's transforming it's increasing the likelihood of a new company coming in building a retirement home because of the hospital. So they feel like they're safe to kind of run their business there. And that's increasing the migration. But then nurses are like, you know, young breeders, basically. Like families with nurses, teachers, and police are like perfect mobile workers who can orient around these communities as the service need expands. And then that, you know, we see that as young families move in and have kids, that's like we've got schools with 15 demountables, and we've just seen the premier came down to our high school last week to announce that they're going to basically rebuild. I can't remember if it was $70 million or $80 million worth of classrooms because we've got so many demountables because our high school's full.
What about the housing to accommodate, you know, additional workers, additional people moving to these areas? Is there a sort of rezoning, or there's more medium or high density housing being built around these hospitals?
There's pockets that are getting zoning attention by local councils and the state government. I would say those pockets are relatively small once you're outside of Wollongong. In Wollongong, we did see that recent state step, which created some increased density around train stations. So we've got, I think, 4 hubs in the Illawarra where they've taken some land around 400 metres around a train station and increased the zoning from standard duplex or triplex to like 6-story apartments. So there's zones where they have created that change. Most of the far south coast is not in that kind of category, and that level of density just wouldn't suit those towns anyway.
No. Yeah.
I personally think there's still enough wiggle room in the housing market because of some of those extra unoccupied holiday homes that if the need gets great enough and the yields grow a bit for the long-term rental market, we'll be able to find some of that in terms of slippage. There's definitely some new estates going in the Shoalhaven, on the fringes of Nowra, on the fringes of Ulladulla. There's a few hundred lots that are developed and slowly being built on. So we are seeing that activity. It's not Campbelltown 10,000 houses at a time type volume. It's happening at a small scale.
So, Matt, you mentioned very early on, you know, like when there's been a mass migration, right? It's the city's not built for it, or the coast wasn't built for it, and there was unintended consequences of people moving, right? You mentioned there about schools and demountables. You mentioned around rentals. You know, what were some of the major? I mean, I had like friends move up to the Central Coast, for example, then had to leave the Central Coast because they couldn't get the kids into childcare. Like they literally just could not. And so they bought houses up in the Central Coast. And now they're moving back to closer to their parents because they just needed childcare, right? So what were some of the other things that popped out over the last few years where, you know, when you grow the population so fast, it's just not ready for it?
Yeah. I definitely think the during the peak of COVID, it was physical housing. So there were just no long-term rentals available for any normal local or kind of any local household to rent, because everything had been chewed up by this kind of mass exodus from the city, and a lot of people from the city who were calling their holiday home their principal place of residence, so they could get around any kind of legislation around where they were sheltering in place, all that sort of thing. Yes, childcare has been a huge one, and we have over the years represented a couple of people who've said we've seen the need for new childcare centres on the South Coast, so we've helped them find their development site. And we always encourage developers to consider childcare centres because there's not enough of them. And we know the need is here. We hear it all the time. There's not enough spots in childcares. So that's a real tension. I think that the schooling situation has been really lumpy on the South Coast, particularly in the Shoalhaven, because the differences in projections of population growth are staggering. And we've had historical statements by state premiers saying there is no population on the growth on the South Coast, which is a stupid statement. And they've had to retract that statement because we've then presented them with the evidence that, hey, guess what? Like, that's just not true. So I think schools are a challenge, and I think they're lumpy. They're big infrastructure pieces that don't move quick enough, and so they don't respond to the nuances of how populations grow. So we definitely see schools as a challenging issue. Look, shops, I think the private sector responds better. So shops are probably more responsive. You might see from time to time that a shopping village has grown, and if the population growth isn't sustained, you might sadly see some businesses close. And there's a vacancy rate in retail in some small towns for a couple of years. That can be really tough on those owners. But it recovers more quickly because as soon as people come back in and there's a demand there, you're going to see people opening up restaurants, cafes, and service-based businesses.
So, what's your prognosis, say, for the next 5 years? How do you see that playing out? Do you think that, have we reached sort of equilibrium? Have we reached back to sort of the normal ebb and flow of demand and the normal sort of migration from the cities, the normal general behaviour of the market? Or are we sort of got to return to a little bit more buoyancy in the area? I mean, you're saying you're on the upward trajectory now. How are you sort of seeing the next few years, say 5 years, play out?
Yeah, good question. I think in terms of the demographic flow and the migration flow, it feels like we've achieved a new normal. So if the tide came in during COVID and then it had to go out, it feels like 2 years was enough and it's now reset to some kind of new normal. I'll be super interested to see how younger migration stats look in the 5 years ahead with kind of tech, with AI, with potentially eventually self-driving cars. Will that bring a younger, more tech-savvy population group out of cities, or is that still just pipe dreaming and it's another 10, 20 years away? I don't know. I think it's pretty safe to bet that the boomers are slowly selling homes in Sydney and they're willing to either downsize in Sydney or to get out. And the ones that are providing that childcare that you mentioned, Chris, are staying where they are. And I've got one set of parents who are in that position where they're pretty tied to where they're staying because they're providing some childcare for some of their grandkids. And others are footloose and fancy free. So they're moving out and they're taking $500,000 from the sale of the $3 million Sydney house, putting it in the super fund. They're buying a nice beach house. They're taking $500,000 to go and travel. That's happening, and it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if you look at the 2021-2 boom, right, a lot of people cashed in. For example, where I am up on the beaches, right, it was, we can sell our house for a premium price. That's going to, we can downsize. It's going to give us some money to top up our super. You're right, and then when the market pulled back, they stopped selling, right, and so they do want to sell. They do want out. They've got old homes. They don't really want to. They're happy to. They need the money, right? They haven't got much other assets, and so. Yeah, you'll see that happening. I mean, you're right. Like, it's hard to know how this AI stuff will play out or the return to work. So they're probably the big stories you're sort of probably tracking, right? If remote work gets really embedded and more and more jobs go fully remote, then that's great for the South Coast. But if it returns to work 4 or 5 days in the city, it's not good, right? So is that sort of a story you're really watching closely?
Look, we watch it. I think I'm a hermit, right? So I don't watch the news, and I try and avoid sort of overthinking it sometimes. And I'm just happy enough that we've always seemed to have enough work, and my boys want me to teach them to surf. So if I'm not taking on another client next week, I'm taking my boys surfing. So it's kind of like a pretty nice lifestyle. And I guess the real thing for us is we see that the appeal, the amenity, the proximity to the city is not changing. And when the government does things like build new hospitals, it just adds to the appeal and to the convenience of living here. So my 20, 40-year outlook is very bullish. I can't see this trend going backwards. And I think that even if people have to go back to the city for work and that crunches some people from being able to leave, I still think there's others who are. So my view overall is the trend will continue.
I guess it is interesting because you think about, with COVID, there wasn't clearly a sort of a latent demand amongst a lot of people to get out of the cities and try this coastal or tree change. And, you're anecdotally, you're basically saying most enjoyed it, those that are going back, it's not necessarily willingly. And I guess if you look at that and you look at ways that if increasing infrastructure or driverless cars, as you're saying, or if we've all got our own little personal little flying devices, whatever the future holds, whatever gives us the ability to have lifestyle and earning capacity and all the rest of it further away from the city, I guess that sort of points to what will happen, doesn't it? I mean, if people get the opportunity, they will leave the cities. Not everyone,
some will. Even if it's not everyone, I think a percentage will. As you alluded to earlier, Veronica, there's some people who really want to be accessing kind of regular music events, regular kind of, more arts and cultural scenes, bigger events with more people. There is a vibrancy that comes with that. And not everyone wants to leave the city. Yeah. But I think there's a percentage that do, and they're chasing that sea change or that green change. And I think there'll always be a subset of Australians that want that.
But I mean, you could just jump and get a hotel in the city, right? Like that's you just have little getaways to the city, and the distance is really only a few hours in the car anyway, right? Is that sort of what a lot of the locals do?
I did 15 years of commuting from the outer burbs to the city in my former life. And when I left Sydney, I hated it. I hated Sydney traffic. I didn't like the city. I didn't want to go to another concert. It was just all over for me. Now that I've been out 15 years, I love Sydney. I want to come back. I'm looking for opportunities to come. And so like Sunday night, Pat Metheny, jazz guitarist, he hasn't been here in 10 years. Can I get back into Sydney and see him at the Opera House? Yes, let's go. So I love it. I love coming back to Sydney with fresh eyes. And it took me a while to get there, but that's how I view Sydney as just a fantastic holiday destination now.
That's great. I love it. Slight twist.
How are the locals feeling though? Is it we didn't buy in the South Coast. We did actually look at Berry and Kiama, and I think I probably would have been completely happy moving down there. Would have made it a little bit difficult with work a little bit, to be honest. On reflection, my wife probably would have hated it, in fairness. She I think she feels like even where we are now, Avalon's a little bit too far out of the city. But I mean, the demographics shifted heaps. I mean, not so much the demographic, but the people that are buying in where we are now, up sort of around Avalon's changed as well. And there was always the attitude of, a lot of people were very protective of, you weren't from Avalon, and how are the locals feeling with, the shift in a lot of new people moving down there that aren't from the South Coast? Is there a little bit of a, I don't know, are people embracing it, or do people sort of feel like it's not what it always was?
Invasion.
It's busier. They can't get a park at the beach, and that's the way that they, how do people feel?
I think the classic kind of, the classic NIMBY or gnome kind of nomenclature that you hear from locals on the South Coast is at peak tourist time. So whilst our economy absolutely needs tourism, and many people run their jobs and their livelihoods off the back of the tourist dollar, we love to
Yep.
hate tourists. So,
Yep.
you know, that complaint is alive and well. I can't get a park at the beach. The traffic's terrible. It took me half an hour to get to 2 minutes down the road. That complaint is alive and well, similar to, you know, complaining about Sydney traffic if you're born and bred Sydney guy. My experience of the town or the townships on the South Coast, and from talking to clients and friends who've moved to other pockets, so I don't think it's just where I am, has been wonderfully open. When we moved here, we had young kids. We were able to connect with other young families who had young kids around school and sport, and it was an easy in for us. I think that if you look at the actual locals, you have to ask who's a local. And people who've been here 20 years but came from somewhere else, it's an irrelevant question to say, are you local or not? Because they might be more local than someone who's only been here for 10, but they're not fourth generation and they're not Indigenous. So then you ask the question, well, there's an Indigenous population here. They're the real locals. And there's like a fourth and fifth generation dairy farming and logging population here. They're more local than the new migrants. But those populations are relatively small in the scheme of things because the towns have been really swamped by people from everywhere. So I think the towns are evolving, and I think that we can't hold on to that idea of just what was. We want to respect what was. We want to learn about the history of a region. We want to, understand what the Indigenous people have gone through, what the families who've built their livelihoods for generations here have experienced. But by and large, the majority of these towns are now full of people who came from somewhere else.
Matt, can you hit us with a property dumbo?
One came up last week. A fella rang me. This was a beach house dumbo. Fella rang me and said, I'm sorry, I'm probably too late, but I'm calling you for advice. I've made an offer on a property. It's an owner-built beach house. The owner has lived in it for more than 6 years. We don't think there's any homeowner's warranty insurance to cover us. Our building inspector has found all these leaks in the house, and the vendor's lawyer has put all these disclaimers in the contract saying we're not fixing anything. What do I do? I like the house. And I'm like, well, I don't know how you can fix this other than getting your lawyer to be more diligent in deleting some of these clauses, because I guess, the dumbo issue was committing to a purchase despite potentially really expensive repair issues that were then not fixable because of this custom contract. And he was trying to work out, how do I solve this issue after the fact? So I think just not getting, probably the issue would be not getting too emotionally connected to a property before you've done due diligence would be the summary.
I would add to making offers before you really know enough to be very clear on what that offer should be. And I see a lot of buyers make the mistake of making an offer, then thinking, and that's very hard to renegotiate once you've already put a number out there.
Yep.
And it's an interesting one. So did he go ahead and buy it?
He did, and I think he got some concessions. Obviously, he didn't go ahead and hire me for any stage of that. He did it himself. So I'm not sure exactly what he got written into that contract. I hope he got some really good protections. I told him to not take any excuses from his solicitor and tell them to man up and fix the contract if he was going to buy it, and to just tell the vendor that there's no way I'm buying it unless you fix these problems. So I tried to give him the advice I could, but
just out of curiosity, had he made an offer with a subject to a cooling off
must
period?
Been a 5.
Because if
it
he'd
was
already
a handshake offer, so there was no cool off. It was a handshake offer, and because he knew he was the highest price offer on the table, he didn't feel like he was at risk of losing the property to another buyer, but he couldn't have the property unless he agreed to this vendor's terms.
A lot of people, and then I love how these ask for advice sort of after he's already shot himself in the foot a bit, and then he still not, he's in a pickle and he's still not prepared to pay for favourite advice. You think, oh dear.
It is
That
funny
happens
though
all the
when you
time.
fall in love with a property though, like, and even if it's not even a great property, sometimes it's the emotional, the elephant takes over, right? And they see a property and it's, and the client's like, you kind of pointing out issues with it. And they're just, no, it's fine. I love it. They're trying to, get, like, I feel like it just gets all the creative juices going. I can move this wall here and I can do that and I can do this. And realistically, it's just shouting out, just move on and buy a different property. But people just get attached, don't they?
Well, it's like confirmation bias. Once we start down a direction, our psychology makes it really hard for us to stop and change direction. It's like we feel like we've already taken 5 steps towards this one thing.
Yeah.
So it feels more like a hurtful loss to start again than it does to actually just finish the thing, even if it's a really bad outcome.
Oh no, I come across it all the time, that people that have gone so far down the path and it's sunk cost. There is actually, we discussed this actually in our very first ever episode with Simon Russell, and there's another bias which I can't think what it is, continuity bias, I think it is. And that's it, once you're on the path, you're on the path, and it's like you can't get off it, but our brains are so hardwired to stay on that path. It's an interesting one. I love storing notes up ever since we did that episode. I've got another book in me, which is really about how we screw ourselves over. Our brains are hardwired to help us make bad decisions. Anyway, thank you so much, Matt. It's really great to chat with you again. It's good to get insights into, what's happening on the South Coast. It's been such a dramatic time, from COVID and onwards. But it's not just the South Coast that I'm sure this applies to. I think any other coastal areas that are within somewhat of a commute of a capital city, I'm sure those coastal areas outside Melbourne on either side of the peninsula, there, potentially Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast potentially could also fit into this category. So look, thanks, Matt. It's been very interesting chat.
No worries.
Thank you.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.